Good afternoon. We're just letting people in. We'll be starting the webinar at the top of the program. Should say at the top of the hour.
This is awesome. Good attendance. Excited to hear what you guys have to say.
Good afternoon and welcome to Graphic Design Crash Course webinar. I am Laurie Freund, Continuing Education Programs Coordinator for the Southeastern Wisconsin, or SUI, Libraries region. This webinar is sponsored by the library systems in the SUI region, Arrowhead, Bridges, Kenosha County, Lake Shores, Milwaukee County, and Monarch. Cole Strostlik is from Winding Rivers Library System is helping me behind the scenes today. Thanks, Cole. Chat feature has been turned off to prevent disruptions. You may pose any questions you have for the presenters in the Q&A box. Each presenter will answer questions at the end of her presentation portion of this webinar. To find the Q&A box, look at your Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen and you'll see a Q&A tab. Click on that and post your question there. If you're having any technical issues, please let us know through the Q&A and Cole or I will help you. Because this webinar is 2 hours long, we will have a short break to give everyone a chance to stretch their legs and grab a cup of coffee. This webinar will be recorded and captioned. You will receive an email after this webinar with the link to the recording, slides, and CE activity report form for those who need it. We are happy now to have 3 talented library consultants from 3 of our Southeastern Wisconsin library systems. Heather Fischer is a public information specialist with Monarch Library System. Jill Fuller is the marketing and communications librarian with Bridges Library System. And Tovah Anderson is the public information coordinator with Arrowhead Library System. They will guide us through design concepts, copywriting, and workflows, talk about how you can improve design across platforms, and how you can set yourself up for success in your marketing role. Our first presenter is Heather. So Heather, take it away.
Thanks, Laurie. Good afternoon, everybody. Like Laurie said, I'm Heather Fischer. I have actually been working in library systems for the last 16 years. All of those years have been with a graphic design focus. But I just wanted to give you a little tidbit as to what I did before I got into the library systems doing graphic design. I actually was an art teacher. So this presentation is giving me a way to dust off my teaching hat and kind of delve back into what the principles and basics of graphic design are. So Jill, if you could start my slide, please. So I am taking care of part 1, and we're going to be talking about design. And you are probably thinking, isn't it just putting pictures and text on a page? You would think so, but I like to think of creating design as the balance of design skills with the ability to apply your own clever concepts that test your creativity. So throughout part 1 of our webinar today, I will be showing you different skills and concepts that you can practice for faster projects, better quality, and to have more fun while designing. Next slide. So look at these statements. Can you relate? I am not creative. I don't have an eye for design. I have no idea what the difference is between serif and sans serif fonts. Well, I'm here to tell you that you are creative. You can learn to develop an eye for design. And because I know you're dying to know, I will tell you the difference between serif and sans serif fonts. Next slide. So you've been tasked with creating a flyer for an upcoming event. It's best to start with some planning basics. Whether you write everything down or plan in your head, do what works best for you because this is your process. So for audience, you need to find out who your audience is because the style of your design will depend on if your intended audience is children, teens, adults, maybe a special interest group, and so on. The next thing you have to start planning is your message. What information do you want your audience to know? Jill is actually going to be talking about this, so I'm not going to elaborate on it, but it is something that you do want to include into your planning stages. The next one is one of my favorites. It's the inspiration. So I absolutely love looking for inspiration. So whether you're browsing through templates or images, there are endless opportunities to find your inspiration. Depending on the project, I usually like to start by searching for a couple images that could work for my project. It's a good idea to have a couple of options. After that, I love to browse through the hundreds of thousands of free templates on Canva. I personally don't use the templates a lot, but I like to pull ideas from a variety of the templates to start creating my own. Once you have those inspiration pieces, then you can move on to creating a mood board. The mood board, you can use an empty document, or you can even do it in your head, depending on how advanced you are in designing. But you can toss those inspiration pieces that you brought from your images or the templates. You can bring that all into a blank document to see what it looks like when it's all together. This is where you will keep the images and fonts and colors that will work for your design and for your project, and you can set the rest aside for something else. And then another thing to keep in mind while you're doing your planning is be prepared for when your aha moment comes. As a designer, this is something that happens while you're in your planning stages. You're looking for the inspiration. You may not know what your design is going to be, what your final product is going to be, but as it all kind of settles down into this process, sometimes you come up with this aha moment. So this is where everything falls into place and your design actually starts to come together. So for me, this is actually where some of the designs I am most proud of have come from. That whole like, oh, I've got it, this is gonna work. So just on a fun note, because now you're aware of these aha moments with designers, if you ever come up to a coworker that's working on a design, maybe they have a look of elated concentration on their face and maybe they're hunched down close to the computer like my images, the lady in my image, and they have no concept that you're near them, please back up, walk away, come back later, because that is probably their aha moment and you do not want to disturb them. Next slide. So some of the, so now that you have a plan, now it's time to apply some of the basic graphic design skills so your finished product isn't just good, it's great. So the design hierarchy that has a lot of different variations. I chose this specific one because it aligns best what I feel the types of projects that you would create in your libraries. So there are 6 elements to this hierarchy of graphic design. There is size, color, contrast, typography, fonts, spacing, and composition. So let's go more into detail on each of these. Next slide. So the first one we're going to talk about is size. So this is enhancing or reducing the size of an object because it will change its visibility in your design. A tip to remember, the biggest design element gets the most attention. So as you're adjusting the size and scale of your main object, and this can be your heading or your image, something that is that main object, you want to make it larger in relation to your other objects. This is the easiest and most effective way to establish visual importance. On the other hand, to de-emphasize the objects and text that are not as important, you will accomplish this by reducing the size to make it less visible. This way, your important main objects are standing out and your supporting information is a little bit smaller. The one thing when you're doing this hierarchy of size in your design is to keep in mind that balance and moderation are key. You don't want to give all the power to your large object because then your supporting information gets lost. It is all about balance. So this is size hierarchy. Next slide. The next hierarchy I'm going to talk about is color and contrast. So color is used with the purpose of drawing attention to the key components of your design. Just think, flashy things are usually very colorful. This is the same concept. You can use this in design. A bright splash of color is effective and hard to miss. So using colors can be fun, but you don't want to go overboard. Too many colors can have an undesirable effect. It can get too crazy busy and just overwhelming. So a good rule of thumb to remember is to aim for 3 to 4 colors. Next, I'm going to talk about the basics of color theory so you can develop an understanding as to why certain colors seem to work so well together. Next slide. So before I start on this color theory, I do have to give you a tiny disclaimer here. I am a huge color theory nerd. Just give me a fancy color wheel and I'm happy. I'm pretty good at matching colors even without those color picker tools. And that's because I understand the concept of the basics of a color wheel. So I'm going to give you a little bit of tidbits about what this is, what this means, so that you can kind of have more of an eye for color. Next slide. So when you're looking at color theory is used to balance and complement colors. With the correct color combinations, you will be able to evoke certain emotions and attract attention with your color choices. Color can evoke emotions? Absolutely. The best way to explain this is by thinking about Pixar's Inside Out movie. Each emotion character is a color. Red is anger, green is disgust, blue is sadness, purple is fear, and joy is yellow. So that is just an idea of how colors can actually bring emotions onto your viewer. By using these certain colors, you can gradually shift that viewer's emotion when they look at your design. So the one thing I wanted to talk about with this color theory is the basics. So what you can see at the top here is I have my primary colors. Those are the red, yellow, blue. Those are like the standards. They're bold and bright. They're elementary. They can be seen as childish. Those secondary colors are right below those primary. Those are the orange, greens, and purples. Combine them all together, you have some colors for the rainbow. It can be exciting. It can be fun. It can be used for designs that maybe are for children, like a carnival, things like that, just thinking of excitement and fun. The next stage of colors are the tertiary. Tertiary are the intermediate colors. They're like the in-betweens. They're bright, but they're not as bold as those primary and secondaries. They're actually the mixes of two colors next to each other on the color wheel. So if you have the green and the blue, you're going to end up with the teal color. If you have the yellow and green, you're going to get a yellow green, and so forth. So those are the primary color and the secondary color together create those tertiary colors. The next ones I want to talk about are complementary colors. These can be extremely effective in design because it causes high contrast. They are the extreme polar opposites on that color wheel. So when you think of red and green, you think Christmas colors. Well, that's why they're together, they're grouped together because they're polar opposites and they cause a lot of contrast. Same thing goes for the purple and the yellow, and then the blue and the orange. So when you're working on a design and you need something to stand out, I suggest you play around with using some complementary colors, and you'll see that wow factor, that pop. The other thing I want to talk about is analogous colors. Those are like the nosy neighbors. So those are where you take your color wheel and you group neighboring colors, you group them together and you use those. They're similar colors. It can be more of a subdued look, more relaxing. And this is where you kind of get your temperature feels. I don't know if you've ever heard about feeling temperature from colors. Whereas if you have a summer flyer, you might lean towards more of the reds, oranges, and yellows. And you can see that on my first color palette is I have more of those warmer tones. If you're doing something that's maybe a winter festival, you usually want to come back and take a look at some of those cooler temperature colors, and those would be the greens and the teals and the blues. Next slide. So in addition to those color families that I just showed you, they have what you can do with colors is you can do tints and shades. Tints and shades are more for monochromatic designs. That would be where you stick with one color family and you create tints of a color, which means go lighter. That is where you add gradual amounts of white to a color and you result in lighter versions of that color. The opposite is also true when you're doing monochromatic. You can create shades of that original color. You can see on my greens, I started with a lighter shade of green. I added tiny bits of black till I got to a very dark green. That means go darker. So shades, think about going under the shade of a tree. It's darker under there. So that's a good way that you can remember what the difference is. Next, I want to talk a little bit about saturation and how you can use saturation in a design. Saturation is about how much of the color is present in your image. So full saturation would be extremely bright, it's full on color, but what you can do in your design, if it's too bright, you can dull that down. You can remove some of that color to make it more of a muted tone, to make it more of a relaxing image. This is also best if you have maybe a lot of images. You can use the difference of saturations to kind of let your eyes relax a little bit. This can be done by adjusting the transparency on those images. You can kind of lighten it up. So next slide. The next thing I want to talk about is the hierarchy number 3, typography. This one is for when you have a lot of text. And let me tell you, over the years of working with libraries, you guys love your text when it comes to anything. There's always a lot of text. So the typography hierarchy is going to come in handy when you guys are designing things. The first thing to, oh, hold on, I forgot where I was on my page here. So in order to prevent your design from becoming a glorified Word document, you need to follow these 3 levels. Number 1 is going to be the most important and visible text. It's usually the header or the title. And you want those to be the largest because it's going to grab that attention and it's going to kind of give you an introduction as to what your piece is about. The second level of information is going to be like supporting information that's related together. Like let's say, so you have your level 1, that's your title. Level 2, that would be your supporting details, like your date, time, place, any other of those informations, whether it's in person, it's online, things like that. That would be related information group into sections so that the reader doesn't have to look throughout the whole design to find that information. It's all grouped together and it's easier to navigate that design. The next level of text is all of the supporting details. I like to think about this level as like a foundation. So think about like a foundation of a house. It has an important job to support that main idea, but you don't always need to see the entire support system. So as you're creating this document that might have a lot of text, think to yourself, is this information helpful before you add it into that design? Next slide. So here we go with those fonts. Like I asked before, you may not know the difference between serif and sans serif fonts. That's something that I've learned over the years. It's just some of those words, and let me tell you, people pick on me for the amount of fonts I have on my computer because designers generally love fonts. So the little background on these fonts is that a serif font, those are the ones that have the little feet. They have the little connectors. Those are the little feet. They're called serifs, and they're attached to each letter because they seem to make it easier for the eyes to glide to along the text. So serif fonts are generally used more in books, things like that, things that are very text heavy, that you want the reader's eyes to glide over those words and connect them. The sans serif, sans is French for without. So that means that there are no little feet on a sans serif font. Those are more common now because we have so many things on computers, things like that. They were more developed to look clean on digital screens, but now so in design, people use them more for more contemporary looks or cleaner looks, things like that. Then when you come into a display font, This is where you use a fancier font. This one might have a lot of personality, like I have at the bottom. Fonts are like personalities. They can be bold, they can be cute, they can be elegant, quirky, they can be loud, they can be, downplayed, things like that. So the display font, those are those personality fonts. You can use them for headlines, but just be careful that you don't overuse them. Sometimes they can be harder to read, so you want to use them sparingly. Next slide. The next hierarchy I want to talk about is spacing. So spacing is all about creating balance between your objects and text and your negative and white space. So there's some importance as to why you need that white space and what is white space. White space is just the absence of your objects. So it is that area that does not have text, it does not have images. And it is important because your eyes, when you are looking at something, without realizing it, your eyes need a place to rest, okay? They also help your eyes navigate through the piece to go from information to information because you're following that negative space to your next information. It also helps separate space in the design layout, and that's why I have the grouping, date, time, location on the other side, because it's all about balancing that. And that's kind of going into that typography where we were grouping those like informations. So just by spacing that out and grouping it, you're already creating a nice amount of negative space to help those readers find that information quickly and to read on to where they need to go next. It can also be used to separate your focal point and help make it pop. So those are just some ideas on how to use spacing to get a better design. Next slide. So the last hierarchy I'm going to talk about is composition in your design. Composition helps give your design much needed structure and organization. There are a couple ways to do this, and we have 3 elements here that can help you achieve good composition. The first one is the rule of thirds. So instead of just putting your focal point right in the middle because, hey, it's the focal point, it should be in the center. That's not necessarily true when you want to make a dynamic design. So what I want you to do next time that you're designing something, create a grid over your piece. And so it should look like a tic-tac-toe board, and put your focal point at one of those intersecting points. That is going to up the dramaticness of your design like immediately versus just putting it smack dab in the center. The next thing to try is the rule of the odds. It seems that when items and images are placed together in quantities of odd numbers, it's more pleasing to the eye than placing an even number of the items. The last element of composition that we're going to talk about is implied movement. Any type of movement, whether it be lines, objects, shapes, maybe repeated design elements, interaction between that negative and positive space that we just talked about, it creates movement in your design. This can also help your viewer move through that piece the way that you intend them to. So wrapping up these hierarchies of design, now we've gone through the 6 elements. Now you will be able to achieve stronger designs if you're practicing these elements. Next, I will touch on a couple additional design elements to help elevate your design skills to the next level. Next slide. So now we have our basic format done. We have our text ready to go. We have the hierarchy done. But now we're about to add like our images into this piece of artwork. Well, you have to do it right, because if you're using the wrong image, it can make or break your design. So when you're looking at images, and this is part of that planning process, like I talked about before, when you're searching for those photos or those images, this is why we want to have a couple options to work with. You want to make sure that it has the style you're wanting, the colors you're wanting, that it's a high quality, a high res photo so that it enlarges well, it doesn't look blurry. So those are some of the things that you want to look for when you're looking for images, like when you're looking at for photographs. The other thing is that you want to make sure is that it complements your design, that it makes sense. There's no way you want to put in a picture just because you like the picture and it makes no sense when it comes to what the reader is reading on the page. So for photos, you may wonder, where do I get these photos? I actually like to use free sources, things like Pixabay and Unsplash. You can go on there, they have just thousands and thousands and thousands of high quality images on there that you can download and use in your documents. Some of them may say that they would like you to credit the author or the artist, and they have easy ways that you can copy the text and you can include it right on your design. They make it very easy for you to credit your artist when it's needed. And then if you move into like the paid features, where you might have a Canva Pro account, or maybe you have an account, a subscription to Shutterstock, things like that, you generally don't have to worry about crediting those authors in those instances, because that's why you pay that fee. You're paying for the usage fee. The one thing to, now I forgot my train of thought here. I was so into it. Now I really can't remember. I'm sorry, guys. I'll move on. So anyway, so that's with photos. So I also want to talk about the difference between vector artwork and raster artwork. So when you're using an actual image, like an illustration, that's a little bit different than a photograph. So a vector piece of artwork, that is created out of lines or paths. And as you can see on my example, you can see those little blue lines with the little white dots. That is showing you that path. That is the path that's creating that artwork. It does not have anything to do with pixels. It is one solid path that's connected with the white dots. So when you resize that, the line actually gets bigger or smaller depending on how you're resizing it, and it's not going to affect the quality of that image. The last one I want to talk about is a raster artwork. Raster is pixels. So unless you're designing something for Minecraft, you probably want to try to stay away from a pixelated image unless it's going to be something small that you're creating. So how it works with pixelated images, it has a set number of pixels. So if you enlarge that, it doesn't add more, it just enlarges the size of those squares. And that's why when you enlarge something that's a raster image, it can get like it's on Minecraft really quick. So next slide. So another thing I want to touch on real quick, after you are starting to work on these designs, maybe your library is ready to start doing some branding of their library, whether it be for flyers having certain structures, or just making sure that you're using the same fonts, things like that. So the three key components to make sure that you want all your library staff to use when you're branding your library are making sure they're using consistent logos. So what I would like to have in a branding toolbox is a couple different options that you can use of your logos. You should have a full color logo. You should have a white option, and you should have a dark option like a black. That way, when you're importing your logo on top of your image, let's say that it's a darker image, you can use that white one to pop it out. Or if you have a lighter background of your design, you can either use your full color or your darker colored black option so that it's easily seen throughout your design. The next thing you want to do when you're thinking about branding your library designs is using the same colors and similar styles throughout your designs. The last one you want to do is using a coordinating font and a coordinating format, like the similar format in all of your documents. Whether that be that you're adding a footer or whatever it is, something that's similar on all of your designs. The overall goal of branding is to create pieces that are similar enough that your viewers can start to recognize your marketing pieces without needing to read who you are. So it does take a while, but if you are consistent with this, it can be achieved. Next slide. Some of the last things I want to leave with you with today is just some of the things that that I try to practice a lot when I'm doing some designing is knowing when to do certain things. So one thing I like to do a lot is knowing when to step back and check on your progress. I can tell you out of experience that when whether you're in your aha moment or you're just kind of dabbling in it and it's not working, whatever the whole thing is, step back every once in a while because things look way different when you're up close versus far away. So I like to do this especially when I'm designing posters or things like that I want to attract attention from further away. It's a good idea to get into the practice of taking a break, stepping back, and seeing if you can read everything. Is it grabbing your attention? The next thing that it's good to know is know when to call it quits on your design. I need to learn to my own advice for this one. I was still working on slides this morning because I wasn't calling it quits on my designs. So if you don't call it quits on your design, when it's done, it's good enough, it's beautiful, it's ready. It may not be perfect, but if you don't stop making those adjustments, you may never will. So make sure you know when enough is enough, it's beautiful, it's ready to go. The last thing that you want to know is know when to step away from a design that's just not working and know when to start fresh. This can happen to any level of designer. Sometimes it's just not clicking. So when that happens, you want to know that you should scratch it and start fresh. And the next two slides, I have an example that a library of mine sent, and I helped her work through that process of starting fresh. So next slide, and I will show you the original. So the original concept of this one is she wanted to bring some awareness to her community that they have a Friends of the Library and they have community members that are banding together and they all appreciate what the library is doing. They want to send this out to their village and town representatives. So she had a random stack of postcards and she wanted to print something on the back so they could send it in and people could see how the community is loving the library. So my thing with that is we could improve on the design, we could improve on the messaging and everything like that. But also, I don't know if you've ever tried to print on something small like a postcard, especially with it being a heavy cardstock and glossy. I don't recommend it. So within talking to her, we decided that we were going to scratch it and we were going to start fresh, just using the same ideals and the same ideas. Next slide, please. So as you can see, instead of printing on an already printed postcard, I designed one very quickly in Canva. This is where the templates and everything came into play amazingly. Like I had this done in maybe 15 minutes as soon as I had my design selected. It was very quick, very easy. All you have to do is do like a search. I did a postcard search and I think I searched love, something like that with hearts so that I could carry on with her I love my library bit. I added a generic like little branding in the corners so that they know what library it's from. I added a little bit about so that they know that it's the Friends of the Libraries week coming up, things like that. I separated the information so that it's easy to read everything, it's not overwhelming, and I worked with my negative space on this one. Next slide. So to wrap it up on this really quick graphic design spectacular that we just went through, I want to give a huge plug to Canva. I hope you guys are using it because as somebody like, so in your element, you're probably not full-on designers. Canva can be a huge help. It's even helping me, and I've been designing, like I said, for 16 years. It's making things easier. I don't use it all the time, but like I said, I look at those templates for inspiration. A great thing, once you have that template or you have your inspiration ready, they already have your layout ready. The colors and fonts are already in place. So all of these hierarchy things that I've been talking about, they already have it done for you. You don't have to use your brain to think about how to accomplish this. They also make it easy to drag and drop images. So you can change any image that they have on there. You can search for images. You can even go to some of the other sites like Pixabay, like I talked to, find a different image and you can upload it into Canva to use it in your template. Another thing that they do, if you have a Canva Pro account, you can easily make changes to match your branding. They have a place where you can put your branding information into your Pro account. Once you have your design done, they make it super easy to either share the image, whether it's a PDF, a PNG, whether it's a template, so that you can share it with other people in your library to use. They have those, it's just a click of a button, save here. They also have a great feature that you can print right from that screen. So when I finished up with the postcard design, I had the option that I could just print right away and Canva would send me the print items to that library. I do have a couple other libraries that used that over the summer. They created scratch off tickets right in Canva and they got delivered like with their scratch off stickers that they could create these cards. So it was pretty amazing. The other thing that Canva has that can help you with your workflow is you can post directly to your social media accounts right from those screens. You can develop a planner in there. So overall, it's just a great tool to have in your back pocket to make your designs faster, easier, and less of a hassle. So if you want to learn more about how Canva works or a lot more about design, they have tons of tutorials, tons of everything that you could need to know how to use Canva, anything like that. You can go to their website and they have it all in there for you. So I hope you guys check it out. I hope I was helpful today. And that's what I have.
Thanks, Heather. There are a couple of questions that people did post. In the meantime, others, if you do have questions for Heather, please feel free to type those into Q&A. So there is one. Is there a color wheel reference that that has what you were talking about that you could recommend for everybody?
You can just do an image search of a color wheel. They have very basic ones that have mainly just the primaries, the secondaries, and maybe the tertiary colors on them. So you can kind of see that. But they also have highly complex ones. So just do a random Google search and you will be able to find a color wheel that has the information that you're looking for. Some of them kind of steer you down the road of how to use those analogous colors, things like that. Oh, and Tovah just posted, yes, there is an interactive color wheel on Adobe as well. So I don't know, Lori, if I can get that URL to you later and we can post that for them.
Sure.
Okay,
That'd
perfect.
be good.
Perfect.
Okay, great. And then the other question we have is, do you find that library aware is the same as Canva?
I honestly cannot answer that because I've never been in library aware. We don't have that. So I'm sorry, I cannot answer that question. Has anybody else that has done design work like Tovah or Jill, have you ever used that?
Yes, we in the Bridges library system, we have library aware. So it does have a lot of the same functions as Canva. It's a little different. There are some things that are a little different, but it does have you know, similar graphic design capabilities in that it has the drag and drop editor. It has templates that you can customize, lots of templates. Probably its biggest asset is that it's made primarily for library. I mean, it's for libraries. So a lot of its templates are more geared for what libraries are going to be looking for. I think that's one of its strongest perks, is that if you're, you know, looking for something like storytime flyers or things like that, Canva's gonna, or Libraryware is gonna have it and Canva may not. So you have to do maybe less customization. One of the biggest things that it doesn't have that Canva does is that it doesn't have the resizing feature that is in Canva Pro, where you could make something like a Facebook banner and then resize it to a Facebook post without having to create a new document. Libraryware doesn't offer that, but it does offer a lot of its templates in various sizes, the widgets, flyers, brochures, so you can have a lot of those different templates available in different formats already. But it does offer where you can post it, you know, post the document or the widget, the social media graphic directly to Facebook or Twitter or something, just like you can in Canva. You can download, you know, the image or the PDF. and save it just like you can in Canva and stuff like that. So it has a lot of similar capabilities as well. And if anyone has additional questions or more specific questions, you can contact me. My contact information will be coming up. We all have our contact information coming up, so you can contact me with more specific questions.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Jill.
Then we do have another question. Do you have big no-nos for color contrast and fonts for accessibility?
Ooh, well, some of the things just on top of my head is be careful. And actually, we have an example later in the presentation. Be careful when you're layering maybe a background color with text on top of it. Don't use like a monochromatic theme when you're doing something like that, because it can be very hard for somebody to pick up on those changes in that tone. Also, you can look at some examples of what color blindness may look like which colors to kind of stay away from. I know there's things online available that you can kind of look at, maybe use purples instead of greens or things like that, if you're looking at more colorblind type of things. Font wise, I always like to, like I said, for the display fonts, use those very sparingly. And also, I generally try to stay away from really scripty fonts or really highly animated fonts or things like with a lot of swirls and twirls and things like that, because that can get very confusing, especially if the reader maybe can't even read cursive. Then you know that a scroll font is not really a great option. So I generally kind of just go for more of like if I'm doing a kids program, maybe I'll try to pull out more of a something that looks like maybe a child wrote it or something like that, that it's legible. It's not too frilly. And then also when I'm doing something like that with any text, I like to make sure that my smallest text is large enough to read. Because as you can see, I'm wearing glasses I never used to. It's getting more and more difficult to read tiny text. So I think that's kind of helping me when I'm producing designs, so that I'm not going to be creating stuff with super, super teeny tiny text that nobody in their right mind can read. So those are just some of the things that I like to kind of keep in mind as I'm working on those things.
Great. We do have one question too that came up. Do you have any tips for searching for fonts to fit a particular design? There are so many and they have such strange names that don't always fit the personality.
Right. So actually, one of my favorite sites to pick up all kinds of free fonts is dafont.com. So it's DAFONT.com. Part of their search feature, you can do a search for holiday fonts, and you can do a search for handwriting fonts. You can kind of scale it down to like decorative fonts or script fonts, or they have a way where you can go in there and you can really kind of narrow down your search. Otherwise, if you do know the name of your font, you can always do a basic search for, let's say you're looking for a similar font. Just do a search for similar font to Calibri or whatever it is you're looking for, and it'll pop up all kinds of options.
Okay, great, thanks. And one more, can fonts downloaded from other sources be uploaded to Canva?
I believe in the pro account, which honestly, it's kind of funny. I use the free account, guys. I don't even have a pro account. So all of the stuff that I'm doing for my libraries and making templates, I purposely didn't do a pro account so that they could have full access to everything I'm using. But I do believe as part of Canva Pro, you can upload certain fonts. So you either use the ones that are built into the free version, or if you have Pro, I've never done it, like I said, because I use the free account, but you can upload fonts into there to use. So that helps with that branding.
Okay, and then another one, Canva always seems to give their own weird names for fonts.
Yeah.
Does any place like dafont.com give a translation to the real name?
Well, that's where you could do just a basic search. You could ask like I can't even Montserrat, or I don't even know what they all are. You could just plug that in, just look up fonts similar to that font, and it just kind of magically appears. I don't know. I've even done it before where I've been looking for a certain font, like it has to be this font and I can't find it. You can actually download images of examples of that font, and you can do a search that way to try to find other similar ones or that exact font. So I've used that quite a bit over the years.
One person said, yes, you can upload fonts to your brand kit in Canva. Also, if you have a 501c3, like a friends group, you can have Canva Pro for free.
Yes, and that systems don't have that ability. But yes, if you have a friends account, then you can apply for that free account. So of the Canva Pro. So.
And that's it for questions.
Okay, yay, I did it. Woohoo. Thanks, everybody.
There was one more if you're willing to.
Okay,
one more. This is it,
fine.
and then we're moving on. Can you import fonts to Oh, no. That's okay, Anna. It's okay. Can you import fonts to Canva, like from other websites?
What do you mean from a website?
Can you import fonts to Canva from other websites? Like from other websites?
Oh, so like if you download a font from DaFont, can you put that into Canva? I don't know all the logistics of it, but you may have to download it to your computer and then to Canva. That's just something that you'd have to try it and see what happens. But knowing that you can upload fonts into Canva Pro, there's got to be a way to do it. Like I said, seeing that I'm working on the free account, I've never actually done it.
Okay.
So.
Okay, that's it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I think we're ready to move on to part 2, right, Lori?
Yes, we are.
Okay. All right, sounds good. Okay, well, next, I'm Jill Fuller. I am with the Bridges Library System. I'm following Heather, which is always difficult to do. But I am going to be talking to you today about the writing aspect of graphic design. And many people, when they think of graphic design, think of the design pieces that Heather was talking to you about today, but there's also the text that we put on our marketing materials. And so I'm going to be talking to you about the copywriting and the best practices for that. So a little background about me: I'm marketing and communications, as we said at the beginning, but I also do a lot of writing in my personal life as well as in my professional life with my communications. Writing press releases, working with the media. I write a monthly newspaper column for 6 or 7 of our local papers around here about the value of our libraries and telling stories and narratives about what our libraries are up to. So writing is a big piece of what I do in my job. And it's probably one of my favorite parts is to just kind of tell our library stories. So the writing and the copywriting pieces is kind of what I love to do best. And that's what I'm most drawn to. So that's what I tend to focus on the most. So in this piece, I'm going to be talking to you about how to really make your writing pop on any sort of promotional piece that you're making, because compelling writing will really matter in your design. And the better that your writing is, it's going to work alongside and complement the design that you create, because that's going to help whoever you are, your audience, your patron, your non-user, whoever you're trying to reach, it's going to prompt them to take that action. So good design, the images that you use, the colors you use, how you design your piece, but also the words that you use, those are going to work together. So we're going to talk about how to do that. So first, as Heather said, as part of your planning stage, you have to think about the message that you're going to be conveying. You're thinking about your audience and all of that, so you have to be thinking about that message. So AIDA is your friend, and AIDA is a very common copywriting formula. There are many, many copywriting formulas out there. If you Google copywriting formula, you can, but you might get sucked down a rabbit hole because there's many of them, many acronyms, some of them many letters long. So I usually tend to go with AIDA. and this is one of the most common ones. And AIDA stands for attention, interest, desire, and action. So we're going to look at, I'm going to go through each of those, but first we're going to look at how that works in action here with a social media ad that I ran for our Gale courses for Bridges Library System. So attention is the way that you hook them. You want to hook your audience first. And a good way to hook them, we're going to talk about that when we talk about titles and headlines in a little bit, but you can see that with the ad here. We hooked them with a question. And so it's ready to love your body. You're hooking them right away. You're getting their attention. Okay, yeah, I am. Next is you want to keep their interest. You've hooked them, so now you want them to stay, especially in, you know, if you're on social media, they can keep scrolling. So if you have a program and you're writing a title, we're going to talk about in a little bit, you've got their interest or you've got their attention, and you want to keep their interest maybe with the description. Okay, so we're going to talk about descriptions in a little bit too. So you want to engage them and keep their interest. So we do that here with your library has free online health and wellness classes to help you nurture yourself. Okay, that's, oh, okay, I'm interested. I want to nurture myself. Then D is desire. Okay, you want to make them want this. Okay, so nurturing yourself, that's part of it. But then also we've got the free meditation classes. So the desire is there because the interest is there, and now you're giving them the desire. It's free, and these are meditation classes. That sounds good. They like that, meditation classes. The audience that we are going for here likes meditation. And then you want to give them a way to act on this. You want to give them the action. So for here, it's a sign up button. Sometimes the way to get it, some sort of next step, it's going to be details on how they can register or when it's available. Sometimes it's just a link, but you always want to make sure that it's clear. So that is your formula: attention, interest, the desire, and then the action. So we're going to kind of work through that a little bit more as we go along here. But first, we're going to talk about one more thing that you always want to think about as you're planning out what your message is going to be, as you're planning out your design, because all of these things work together. And that is, again, another acronym. I'm so sorry, but this is how it works. It's called WIFM. And literally, this is what copywriters call it, WIFM, okay, because it's easier to say than WIIFM. But it stands for what's in it for me. And so this is not just who, what, when, where, why. Those are all of the things that you are thinking about with maybe the program that you are designing for, or the event coming up, or the database that you're promoting, who, what, when, where, why. But those details, that doesn't push someone to actually take an action and do something. And you can have like the prettiest flyer, but that still maybe won't make them take an action. You have to get into their shoes and really think about what is going to make them take that next step. So the design and the words are going to work together on that, but you have to think about your audience, and you have to think about being in their shoes and what's in it for them. Okay, so before you start designing anything or writing anything, one of the things that I like to do is make a list of benefits to the audience that I have in my mind who's going to be interested in this, making a list of benefits to them, because that's going to help me decide on what my message and my design is going to be. So you really want to know who your patron is, what are their needs, what are their trigger points, what are their motivations, what are they going to get out of this. So this is something that I designed when we were in the middle of COVID. And as many of you know who have Ancestry Library, it was something, you know, Ancestry decided that we could allow access at home, where normally it's only allowed access from inside the library. So I created just a social media graphic that our libraries could post online saying that now access is at home until April 30th. What a joke. Well, at the time, that's what we thought. We were so optimistic or naive. But the title, the heading that I put on here was not just, you know, Ancestry Libraries at home now or something like that. You know, that would have been the what, right? That would have just been a detail. But I'm trying to think what's in it for them. My audience are genealogists who are at home, maybe want to do some research, maybe they're bored, they're stuck at home. Okay, so when I'm putting myself in their shoes, what is their need? What is something that's going to entice them to do this? So the kind of the headline that I came up with, the words here was bring your family home, right? So it kind of taps into what the details are about it. Ooh, it gets their interest. They want their attention. They want to know more. What do you mean? But also it kind of ties into a lot of them aren't seeing their family right now. We're all stuck at home. We're all isolated from our loved ones. I can bring my family home. What do you mean? They want to see more. And then they get the details there that they can access Ancestry Library. So it kind of operated on 2 levels there. But I had to understand my patrons and their need at that time during the early days of COVID. So I was really trying to think of with them, what's in it for me. All right, so we're going to talk first about, now that we've done some of the planning, now we're into the nitty gritty. We've got some ideas about our design maybe, and now we're going to start actually writing our text. So start with your titles or your headlines, depending on what you're writing. If you're writing a social media graphic, you're thinking more along like headlines. If you're writing a program flyer, you're thinking maybe about your titles, your program title. But either way, it's going to apply to both. So this is a great way to start the starting of ADA. Your attention grabber is often going to come from maybe your program title or your headline, but the big bold words, the biggest part of your graphic, your flyer, your brochure, this is where you're going to start. This is the attention piece of ADA. Okay, so here are 2 examples of something I've created. The first one was for Library Card Sign Up Month. We did a series of social media graphics. The tell a friend, share the love of libraries was the same on all of them, but the kind of information that was there was different on everything. So this one was library cards are free. It was just big, it was bold, it gets the reader's attention. The one on the right is for our app, and the headline there is search better. Okay, it's not very descriptive. Headlines and program titles are not necessarily supposed to be, because that makes them boring. They're supposed to be attention grabbing. Okay, you can use your description later on for information, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Okay, so when you're writing your titles or your headlines, the first thing to think about is to know your power words. All right, your power words, just like your colors and your color theory that Heather talked about, they tap into emotions. They speak to fears. They can encourage or excite your audience. They can establish trust. They can get them curious about something. So for like search better, what do you mean? I want to search better. What do you mean by better? Right? It's kind of getting that, or it can make them want something more. Free is always good. We've got other ones on here. These are just a few examples. But depending on what exactly it is that you are promoting, or what your program's about, or what it is that you want to convey, you're going to choose potentially some power words that will, go along with that. So here are just a couple: epic, unique, brand new, surprising, panic, mistake. These can also be used in your description. So these aren't just for titles. So for example, if you're doing like something about like Medicare, the headline or the social media caption could be like, don't make that mistake, or something like that. And then underneath you have a little bit more description about, what that, maybe it's about, doing your Medicare stuff correctly or something like that. But the word mistake is going to make people pay attention. Like, what mistake? I don't want to make a mistake, right? Instead of just having something kind of boring about just like, come to our next Medicare class. Okay. And they're going to be like, why? What's in it for me? Right? You're always thinking about your patron and trying to get them to understand what is in it for them, because you don't want them to make a mistake about this very important thing. I will have some resources at the end. There are lists and lists out there on the internet with like 250 top power words. So I do have a link to one that I tend to use. Some other good tips about writing your titles or your headlines, depending again on what you're writing. Use questions. Questions are always a really good attention grabber, because then people automatically in their head are answering them. So I did that on that social media ad. Ready to love your body? And people immediately, even subconsciously, are going, yeah, I think so. I always, sure. So I use questions a lot. It's a good rule of thumb. Keep it short. They should be only a few words, or a very, very short sentence. This is one that I did. This was just a social media graphic. So the actual information about Flipster, which is the magazine app that we have at Bridges Library System, was in the social media caption. So that was the descriptive information. But this was the headline, was in the social media graphic, and just 3 words, time to explore. It's not descriptive. Headlines don't need to be, or program titles don't need to be descriptive. What it is attention grabbing. And then be creative, you know, be creative, see what you can come up with. Do puns if you need to do puns. If that's too silly, that's okay. But really kind of try to go with the tone of what you're promoting, go with what your audience is used to, play around with it a little bit, try out different things. Sometimes I like to sit down with a piece of paper and just brainstorm as much as I can. And you never know what's going to come out. Set a timer for 5 minutes and see what you can come up with. I do that with my descriptions as well. You never know what you're going to come up with. All right, tell me what it's all about. It's time to write those descriptions now. So this is an example, and we're going to go through this in a little bit, but here's something that I did for our Access Video on Demand database too. So Go Ahead Binge is the headline, right? Again, short, sweet, creative. And now we have the description of stream travel shows with your library card, no holds, no checkout limits. We'll talk about the description in just a minute. So when you are doing descriptions, and these, I describe these, or I'm thinking of these as either the descriptions in your printed materials, so you're in your newsletter, you're describing the upcoming programs, or the captions in your social media posts, anything that is a couple sentences long. So a little bit more than just a brief headline or a program title or something like that, where you're giving some actual description. This is where you're keeping their interest. So this is the I, and sometimes the desire piece, the A and the D, or the I and the D in your ADA formula, okay? You don't want it to be too long. So here are some tips on how to give the information that you want to give, keep their interest, and not have them go wandering off to something else and overload them, okay? So this is actually sometimes the most important piece of it, so stick with me. The first thing you want to try to do is the so what test. And this is fun. This is, again, get out a piece of paper and you write down, okay, what do you want them to know? So with this one, I did consumer reports. We've got consumer reports. And then you go and then you write literally underneath it, so what, right? Pretend you're your patron. So what? And then try to answer that for your patron. Pretend you're having a dialogue with them. So, okay, we've got consumer reports. And then they go, so what? And then you go, well, you can research purchases before you buy. And then ask it at least 1 more time. Sometimes you have to do it 2 more times before you get to the meat of what you're trying to tell them. So what? And then, well, you can save money, and so you buy better. There you go. There is your description, right? So that is what I would put if I was going to do a description about consumer reports, like on a bookmark. I would have some sort of a title, and then I would say, save money before you buy so that you can buy better. And then I would have a little thing about, you know, log in here to get consumer reports, blah, 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 right? It's really only 1 or 2 sentences instead of a big, long, you know, thing describing what consumer reports is and blah, blah, blah. You know, if you want to get to the meat of it, try the so what test. You can do this with your program. Instead of a big, long thing about we're going to be doing this and so is going to be coming and they're going to be talking about this and then we're going to talk about this. Start with that and then go, so what? And then say, well, you'll learn about how to do this. Like, so what? Well, then you'll be able to do this. And eventually you'll narrow it down and then it'll be at the meat of it. And you'll be like, you'll feel confident about being able to build your own birdhouse. Oh, okay, then I'll come. And that's your description. Feel confident about building your own birdhouse when you come to our DIY birdhouse program. Boom, there's your description. So sometimes you just need to do that so what test. It's doing with them. It's putting yourself in your patron's shoes. All right. The other thing that you want to do is you want to focus on benefits, not features. Sometimes and I am a librarian, I love to do this too. I want to talk about all of the things that is offered. It does this and it does this and it does this and we do this and we offer this and we offer this. So on the left, you can kind of see that I have, this is a graphic from a few years ago where I would just make like graphics for each individual class. And that's cool and it's helpful. And some people really do want to see which classes are offered. But that's kind of more of just the feature and like less enticing. And then on the right, these are ones that I've started doing where it's actually a benefit. So, okay, computer skills for the workplace. That's great. That's more of a feature though. On the right, tell your story, which is more of a benefit because there's a whole list of classes that they can do that with. So you can talk about features later or in a smaller piece of the description, but not up front. Hook them with the benefits first. So those benefits are really what's going to pull them in. So here's a good example of that. We started out, this is a program that we're going to be doing, and the text that I was given to edit, I do a lot of this editing for my colleagues because I told you I love to write and edit. The text that I was given was, the library is collecting and recording veteran stories for a new oral history project. Sign up today to record your military service story. So the focus really was what the library was doing. The library is collecting and recording veteran stories. So sign up today. And really, that's just kind of like, what about what the library is doing? It's not really about the patron. It's not. So again, I did the so what test. It's like, okay, so what? Like if I'm talking to a veteran that I want to participate in this, they'd be like, so, like, what do you want me to do? And then the other thing was there wasn't really any benefit to the veteran. So like, again, if I was talking to someone, they'd be like, okay, what's in it for me? So then I rewrote it. I added your story matters. And then I did this description here. You're invited, so putting the emphasis on you, you're invited to record your military service story with a loved one for a new oral history project at the library. Your story will be preserved and shared for future generations. So I'm telling them the so what, that you get to record your story, and I'm telling them what the benefit is. Your story will be preserved and shared for future generations. So again, so taking both of those things and trying to make sure that they understand the benefit for them. So just 2 sentences, but they're able to really get the gist without explaining the whole program to them. Another thing that's going to help with your descriptions when you're writing them is using your action verbs and your super adjectives, making sure that you're really making your language work for you. You can spice up your descriptions a lot without making them super long if you just use your verbs and adjectives really, really well. So a lot of times we like to use our verbs in kind of a demanding way. So come to our story times and join us and things like that. But we can actually have some more fun with our verbs. You know, make something, create something, race on over to the library to do this with us. If you've got, you know, see if you can pair your verbs with what the actual program or event or whatever is. You know, so for example, if you're doing like a pajama story time, instead of come to pajama story time, how about snuggle down with a cozy bedtime book at pajama story time, right? You're using snuggle. That kind of is very enticing. So like your call to actions, watch what your verbs are, jump into fun, you know, enjoy some music. I think we use that in some of the examples later on, instead of just listen to music, right? Listen to music, anyone can do that, but enjoy some music, right? It's sometimes about tone. What tone are you using with the language that you choose? Adjectives are the same thing. If you just have a noun or something that you're using, just see if just adding an adjective just spices it up a little bit. So here's an example that I wrote. Here's something that I just made up. The first try, learn to make a garden pizza with veggies from our community garden. There is nothing wrong with that description. It's just a little boring, in my opinion, and I wrote it so I can say that. Here's the rewrite, which makes it a little bit shorter and gives it it spices it up a little bit, in my opinion. Make a delicious pizza, super adjective, delicious, with fresh picked veggies, fresh picked from our garden, and an exclamation point, just to make it a little more fun. And I also did make instead of learn to make, because it's kind of obvious that they're going to be learning how to make. So we're just going to go with make. You could also have put cook a delicious pizza. Cook makes it a little bit more, you know, it's a little stronger of a verb maybe, or is a little bit different of a verb maybe than they're used to seeing at a library. So just kind of after you write a description, I would suggest just writing it out, right? A lot of writers, we call our first drafts, or sometimes even our second drafts, our barf drafts. I don't know if I'm allowed to say barf in a recorded webinar, but I just did. the barf draft, you get it out, and then, or you get out a couple of different options, and then you rewrite it, and then you edit it, and you just kind of look like, oh, I could add an adjective there. I could change that word to make it sound a little bit better. So looking back at this one, so stream travel shows with your library card, no holds, no checkout limits. And then down below, I added a little bit extra, over 40,000 documentaries, TV shows, indie films, kids shows. So some takeaways here. At the top, it's just 2 sentences, nice and easy to read. It highlights the benefits, no holds, no checkout limits, okay? Sometimes I like to try to stay positive and not use no, but with this one, I thought that it worked because one of the biggest things with like Libby and things like that, even sometimes our own collections, just the physical collections, is holds and checkout limits are things that people don't like. So here it was like, no holds, like this is a benefit. I use an enticing verb, okay? In that there's with the go ahead and binge, that's kind of not in the description, but you know, we're using some enticing verb there. And then I used bullet points, okay? Because sometimes bullet points can be easier for people to read instead of a paragraph. I could have listed it all out or used commas, but I did bullet points because from a design point of view, it's just easier for people to read. All right, and then here are some just last minute writing tips. We've written all of our stuff, we've got our text ready. And so as you're getting your marketing materials ready, here are just some top writing tips. Make it short, make it sweet. Kind of already mentioned that. Write like you speak, especially if you're on social media. Every library is different and your tone, your branding tone is gonna be different, your voice, but try to write like you speak. Use contractions, again, especially on your captions on social media. You go for maybe a more of an informal tone. This works also for like descriptions of programs, maybe in your newsletter or something like that, or in your email blasts, because it makes it sound like there's a person behind it and your patrons are going to respond to that. If you're a little informal, if you're more conversational in your tone and in your writing, that's going to come across. You know, so use language that's not too formal. Obviously, you want to pay attention and use, proper grammar and things like that. But you don't have to use very like highfalutin language and words and things like that. You can use don't instead of do not all the time. Make it personal. Try using you and your, because then it does sound like you're talking to them directly. So for example, when I was writing up something, I was just, typing up in one of our email blasts, I had written, on the last day of August, we're looking back at the incredible summer people had at their local libraries. And then I thought about it and I was like, I'm writing this to people who were at their libraries this summer. So I rewrote it and I put, on the last day of August, we're looking back at the incredible summer you had at your local libraries. So again, you just want to maybe sometimes just change who you're talking to. It can sometimes help to just imagine an audience in your head or one person or one patron in particular, just sometimes to kind of help you as you're writing. And try to stay positive, like I said earlier. If you're making a sign, for example, or something like that, instead of no phones, please use your phone outside or something like that. Try to just shift that tone a little bit to try to just make your language a little bit more positive. Finally, oh no, here we go. Never mind, not finally. I wanted to show another example of just kind of meshing all of this together where we've got a headline, a description, and then a call to action where we're taking ADA and all of these things I talked about and putting them together. This was another social media ad that I ran, as well as I believe a social media graphic that I did where I had the image. I think I had this overlaid on the image, although I didn't pull that example for the social media graphic. So I could have done, Libby, read books on Libby, right? That's very telling people what to do, kind of a bit imperative. But instead, I want to entice them. So I'm going to use the ADA formula of attention, interest, desire, and action. So the attention is the picture, the image that I chose, as well as the headline of all you need now is a book, right? I'm pairing that with the image. And then with the interest and the desire, read cozy. I'm using an adjective there with free library books. And then I'm giving them a very clear call to action, download library books here. And then I think I had a link or the sign up button. So that's where you're taking, instead of just always just telling people what to do with the text, or just kind of giving way too much information about something and thinking that that's what people need. The AIDA formula, putting yourself in people's shoes, asking so what, asking what do people, what is it, what's in it for them, that's going to help you really talk to them a little bit better through your marketing materials and get them to act and get them to respond. Finally, I just wanted to bring this up because this is very important, is paying attention as well to conscious language. So we do want to strive for inclusive language whenever we are using text and doing copywriting. So this is just basically being very conscious and intentional of the words and phrases that we're choosing in our marketing materials or in any sort of press releases, any social media text, whatever we're writing, to avoid just discriminating or excluding groups of people. So when we are conscious about this, it resonates with more audiences because we're speaking and writing to everyone. This isn't something that is easy, and it does mean that we have to try to understand our own unconscious biases, which is something that takes time and practice and effort, and it is not something that just happens overnight. But it is something that is that we all need to work towards doing. And especially with language. So I do have on the resources page that will be shared with you and will be on these slides, there's quite a few great resources that I recommend, particularly about how to use conscious language, and websites that send out like monthly newsletters about using conscious language with articles linked to it and stuff that I get every month. And I learn a lot from it. So I would recommend anyone interested in it. But whenever you're thinking about conscious language and writing things, always ask yourself, who is my audience? Who am I envisioning? Who am I not envisioning? And who may feel excluded from this? What is the tone that I'm using? And is there another or better way to say this? Another great thing is always to just check with someone else if you're not sure. If something gives you pause, just check with somebody. Check with a colleague, check with someone that may be impacted by it. And also just do your research. We're librarians, Google it. See if this is something that's come up before. And if you're not sure, try something else. There's always a different way of saying something. So here are kind of three main things that there's many more things that you could look for, but here are some main ones. Gendered terms. So if you're kind of talking to theoretical people, avoid using pronouns. So for example, instead of saying like ladies and gentlemen, on in a social media post or something like that, just say hey everyone or something like that. If you're doing alt tags or things like that, which that's kind of going into the weeds a bit, but just say like a person instead of assuming a gender, because we can't assume those types of things. This also ties in with family. If you're doing a program or you're don't just have one for moms and dads, have one, talk about caregivers or things like that, because we can't assume family dynamics as well. So that's something to keep in mind. Avoid turns of phrases that might be confusing to someone who maybe does not speak English as a first language. So I hadn't really thought about this till I was doing some research into like colloquial expressions, but things like that was a piece of cake, or knock it out of the park. If someone doesn't actually speak English very well, they might actually be confused by what that means. So there's other ways to say it, like this should be easy, or you'll do a great job, or something like that. There are other ways to say those kinds of turns of phrases. So that's just kind of something to keep in mind. Or if you do use that, like in a program title or a headline, explain it later on, maybe in your description somehow. Another thing to keep in mind, especially like this time of year, is a really good thing to keep in mind, like with Thanksgiving coming up and things like that, is cultural or ethnic terms. So I have seen marketing materials that talk about having yoga gurus. Well, a guru is actually a religious advisor in some religions. So is that person actually a guru? Maybe it's just better to say that they are a yoga teacher. Or maybe don't say that we're going to have a stuffed animal powwow, because a powwow is actually a Native American gathering. So just kind of watching again what types of words you're using and whether or not you're using them appropriately, or is there something that you can choose that's a little bit better. Those are all things that are good things to keep in mind. These are my further resources. So these will be on the slide for you. You don't need to write all these down. You will get them at the end. And I think that this is, we're going to do a stretch break unless, Lori, you wanted to do the Q&A first.
Yeah, why don't we do that first?
Sure.
So there was one person, is this a suggestion we can use books equals ebooks?
What was the question?
If the suggestion you have is that we can use books equal ebooks.
Can we use
Books equals
ebooks?
ebooks. Yanni, I'm not yeah, Yanni, I don't know if you can maybe explain a little bit better, but that was her question. I don't know if it means you can just put books instead of ebooks.
Like on your marketing, like, I mean, if you're marketing ebooks and you say books equals ebooks, I mean, I think you could, I think it depends on what exactly you're marketing or what you're saying.
Could be.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
not quite sure what that
unless
question
Yanni, you want to explain a little more, we're consider that finished.
is.
And then there was another person who wrote, you mentioned links. Is this where patrons go for how to?
The links that I mentioned is I have a slide there that has all those links. Maybe that's what they mean. The slides I think you're sharing later on, Lori, right after this. So
Yes.
So all of those links that I had on that resources slide will be available to everyone if that's what this attendee is asking about.
I'm not quite sure. So again, and that person is anonymous. So if you need to explain a little bit more, please go ahead and submit another clarification, and we'll go through that.
Okay.
Okay. Otherwise, that is it, and we are ready for our stretch break. So there's something here. That's what's in it for us. We stretch.
There we go.
All right. So
how
we're
long?
going to take 5 minutes.
Okay.
All right. We'll be back.
All right. Great.
Okay. Welcome back. And now we're ready to go with Tovah.
Hi, I'm Tovah Anderson, and I've been with Arrowhead Library System for 5 years as their public information coordinator. Before that, I put my degree in graphic communications to work at News Media Corporation, designing newspaper and magazine advertising and publication layout prior to that. So I get the pleasure of introducing the last part before we workshop a few of the projects. And this is perhaps the least glamorous part, but is really going to save you a lot of time and headache down the road. So I'm going to talk about designing your workflow and how to work smarter, not harder. So hopefully that'll be helpful. All right, next slide, please. So whether you're a full-time designer and marketer, or it's just an as assigned duty, a little time spent gathering information and planning will save a lot of time and hassle. And what I'm talking about is knowing what your options are as far as who you want to talk to, what ways you have to communicate with them. I'm talking about working in a workflow that is the most efficient that it can be, how to save time and not backtrack all the time. And then tips and tricks for getting your projects done. Next slide, please. So here's a few of the ways you can know your options. You can know which audiences you want to target. You can know your marketing channels, and I'll talk about all of these if they're words that aren't super familiar. Knowing your promotional outlets and their contact information saves time, and knowing what publications are available to you and when you need to have when their deadlines are and when they publish, essentially. All right, next slide, please. All right, so when you want to talk about your audience, there's some easy ways you could segment the audience to help you target your efforts. And this is important because it would influence the types of images you use, the language you use, possibly the colors, and it would help you decide which channels and media outlets to use or where you want to hang it in your library. So really it's important to know who your audience is. So maybe it's by age, maybe it's like adults and teens or parents or babies in preschool. Maybe you're doing a campaign that might have a slightly different message for card holders versus non-card holders. Or maybe you're really looking to up your email campaign and you want to segment by like super readers or people who prefer adult collections versus YA collections, or maybe you want to have a separate email list for people who really like to attend programs, and so then they just get information about programs. So really, you can segment your population, your audience, however you want to, and maybe you want to break it down, maybe it just goes out to everybody, but really that's helpful to know your options and know what you want to do with that. Next slide, please. So then you also want to know what your promotional channels and outlets are. So what I mean by channel is perhaps you want to identify a channel inside the library and a channel outside the library, and then a channel of communication that's only for staff. And this might be different for you, but this is pretty general for libraries. And then you would want to make a list of all of your outlets under those channels. So maybe inside the library, you do a lot of bookmarks and you have digital screens, and maybe you want to include your book displays. You might hang posters and flyers. You might have brochures that you design and have at the checkout. You might have a program guide that you distribute at the desk or in various locations. And possibly for outside of the library, maybe you mail a guide out. You have your website that faces outward. You have your social media accounts. Your emails go outside of the library. You can contact the media, like the newspapers, the radio stations, the TV stations. You have online calendars and listings, whether that's Google or a newspaper's listings, or maybe you have a community board that it goes up on. There's a myriad of paid advertising that's outside the library. You can do direct mail campaigns. And the lists go on for all of these. And then maybe if you need to send a message to staff only, maybe you have the intranet, an email to all the staff, staff bulletin boards, maybe you have a staff newsletter, maybe you have announcements that you put over the radio, all kinds of things. So this example was taken from the Schaumburg Township Library's marketing plan, but really it's just a jumping off point for you to inventory what is available to you. Next slide, please. So a lot of times it's helpful to take that list one step further, and you can add the contact information and names. If it's like a newspaper or a radio station and you have specific people you want to talk to, you can add the submission deadlines, the publication dates. And if it's helpful for you to include image dimensions, or if there's a preferred word count that you're writing an article for the newspaper and they say, well, we want 250 words every month, or, you can include that in the note space. And then you can even break it down by local and regional and national, or if you want to break it down by what kind of media they are. Maybe you have community partners that you like to share your information with, and you can list it all in one place. So then when you have a bigger project, you can just go through and easily see what areas you want to hit and who you need to talk to. Otherwise, you can just, for your traditional projects, you also have all that information ready and handy. Next slide, please. All right. So after you've done that background work of gathering your information and knowing all your options, it's time to look at your own process. And this is really, how do you do your marketing and designs? How do they go from idea to reality? And then how do you communicate that process with others as well? So a couple ideas, and I'll talk about these as well. You can create a decision tree. You can institute an intake or request form for each project. And then you can just plan out a logical workflow for yourself. Next slide, please. All right, so it's important to know and communicate how you want your marketing process to go, especially in larger organizations where there's more people submitting requests and more people interacting with you or your department. So this decision tree comes from Hedberg Public Library's marketing plan, and they decided to make this decision tree, and it starts with I need. So it might be, I need marketing assistance on a large atypical project, or I need marketing for a program, or I need reprints, or I need a website update, or just whatever is pertinent to you, like whatever are kind of your channels of what you do. And then it walks people through, like, does it need a change? Does it just need to be reprinted? Does it need to be refreshed? Does it need to be redesigned? Or maybe if it's an atypical project, you need to invite us to a meeting so we can discuss it. Or, you know, so this is just basically telling people how you want the process to go and walking them through it with just really easy questions. This can kind of give a structure to your department or your day or your month or your process, just making everything fit together and be streamlined and be easy and logical and step by step. So this might involve having a standard combination of print and digital promotions for general programming. So like if it's a monthly story time or weekly story time or whatever, then it would get, you know, maybe you make a Facebook event for it, maybe it goes in the program guide, and maybe it goes on your digital sign. And that would happen for all of your standard repeating programs or, you know, something like that. You might also consider making a single request form that kind of fits the different areas of this decision tree. So it might have a checkbox for, you know, the reprints or the website update, or you know, it's a special project, or, you know, just something to help walk them through this decision tree and get you the information that you need. And you might also consider, if your library has a lot of printed pieces, you might want to implement a tracking number on these pieces. So maybe a 6-point number that you include in your file name so you can find it. So if somebody says, oh, I need this brochure reprinted and I need 150 copies, you don't have to kind of struggle through your mind. What did I call that font? Where did I save it? Or did so-and-so make it? Or was that something I made? So you would know that, okay, this is a storytime flyer, and here this teeny tiny text says it's number 107. So you could search storytime 107, and then you would find your document pretty quick. Next slide, please. So here's just a very general, very basic, I didn't customize it at all, intake form. So basically, it's a creative brief that gets you all the information you need. And you can customize these, or you can have an internet form, like a Google Doc. Whatever helps you keep things straight is wonderful. So this might have a place for deadlines. It might have a place for the important information like date, time, location, description, community partners that are partnering with you on it. It would have a place for what deliverables are needed, like a press release, social media, if they want you to come and take a picture, like a photograph of the event, the size of the poster, mailing specifications, any of that. And then if any special approval is needed, that should go on there. For instance, if maybe you're working with your municipality or something and they need to sign off on it, you definitely want to know that before going to the printing phase or whatever your next phase is. And then if any artwork is provided, let's say you have a performer coming in and they have headshots they want you to use, or they have a marketing toolkit, it's great to know that ahead of time. And that can be on your form. Next slide, please. All right, so once you know your options, you have a system for how you want to receive project requests and what that flow should look like. It's time to look at your personal workflow. And what I've personally found helpful is to get all this gathered information that we just talked about and determine what pieces I'm going to make the most and decide what order it makes sense to create them in, and then just do it. So let's talk about that a little bit on the next slide, please. So maybe your library has a standard combination of what you like to do. Like your programs all go in the program guide. They all go on the website. They go on your Google Calendar. You get posters for most of them. You need a Facebook image for your events. You add it to your digital signs. And then for the really big ones, you do a press release or a radio ad or something like that. So then you can kind of say, okay, well, I'm going to need a full description. I'm going to need an image for the guide. I'm going to need a shorter version of the text for the website, or maybe you use your full description. You're going to need an image. You're going to need alternate text for that and maybe a caption. For For your posters, you might want even shorter text or a different image. You're going to need image size for Facebook. You're going to need your call to action for that. Maybe you need a video for it. Maybe you need a sound clip. You're going to need a press release, and maybe you can use another one of those images or your caption that you created for your website in that news release. So basically, you just compile a list of what you do most often, and then we're going to move to the next step on the next slide. So there's not a one-size-fits-all workflow that's going to help everyone on every project. It's really a matter of thinking about what works best for you and what's going to save you time in the long run. So possible ways you might want to think about how you want to approach this list of deliverables that you need to make. It might be you want to write everything, then design everything, and then record whatever needs recording. Or maybe you want to start with the project that's going to take the longest amount of time or uses the most information and work down to your smallest project. Or maybe you want to go with deadlines, like what item do I need first and what item do I need last? And maybe you want to consider, what needs approval from other people like the programmers that might take longer to do. So really it's about finding something that works with you. So I've written a little example here. When I work with one of my libraries for their monthly programming, this is kind of well, I guess that's a different example. So the example on the slide is, the write, design, record. So I would write everything from the longest to the shortest. Then I design things from the most complicated to the smallest. And then if I needed to record any video or audio, I would do that. And then I would go ahead and post everything and send it out to the newspapers and upload it to the website. All right, next slide, please. So then when it comes time to get things done, there's a few tools that'll help you with that. Project trafficking, project planning, set approval processes, and then I've got some tips. So let's go ahead and look at the next slide. So it's kind of important to track your project. A lot of us have to-do lists, but this might take it a step further. You may wish to have key deadlines in there, like when your programmers have a deadline, when they give it to you, then when you get approved to them, and then when it has to be finally approved by, when it needs to go to the printer, when it needs to come back. So you can do this several ways. You can do it with a notebook and a pencil. You can have a dedicated calendar that you schedule all these things in. Maybe you keep a spreadsheet. Some folks make custom databases or their specialty project tracking software. So it's just whatever works for you on that one. Next slide, please. So when it comes to project planning, sometimes we don't have to be involved with that a whole lot. And sometimes as the communications professionals, we do a lot of the planning. So long-term projects might benefit from something like a Gantt chart or something similar, whatever works for you, but where you track out different stages of it and what needs to be accomplished and when it's going to happen. So a real life example of this would be my first project at ALS was actually we were updating to a new ILS. And so it was really important to, one, define our audiences. So we had staff needed to know and patrons or community members needed to know. So then it was important to also realize that we had digital content, printed content, and like other content, which I'll get into later. But so then we were able to decide, okay, well, we need an introduction phase, a preparation phase, a launch, and a post-launch. And then we needed messages and things for both channels on all of those outlets. So you can see already it's getting complicated, and a chart really helps. So basically, the point of whatever you're making to help you sort through this, you need to tie key dates to specific information to targeted audiences in specific channels using pre-selected outlets. So that's really kind of the basis of all this information we've gathered, is to have all of that on hand so it's easy to do, because it sounds complicated, but if you have all of your information gathered, I totally believe in you, you can do it. All right, next slide, please. All right, so let's talk a little bit about approvals. Now my notes are gone. So basically you want to know, you want to be secure in your knowledge that this project is actually approved before you move to print, or before you publish it online, or before you make your post on social media. So maybe you have complete control over your social media channel, but anything that gets printed like the program guide needs an approval by someone else. So you want to know who needs to approve that, or if you have people working under you, whose work are you approving? And then those big projects, like I just mentioned, if you have different phases, you're going to have additional deadlines. So you need to know not only who's approving it, but at what point in each stage you need approval. And then you want to make sure that your tracking system, whether it's that pen and pencil, or if it's the big project tracking software that you buy, that you're tracking how it's like that it is approved, or it's not approved, or it's pending, just so you know where you are. Next slide, please. All right, so here's just some tips for getting things done. Please use templates whenever possible. And what I mean by this is, maybe your posters all have the same branding slug at the bottom. It's got your logo, it's got your website, your address, your phone number, whatever you need on there. So you can just stick that on the bottom of each of your posters, and you're good to go, and you know you have all that necessary branded information. And if you have a book club that they just change the title every month, maybe you could have like a standard slide or something, or a standard ad or poster for that, and you just update the colors in the book title, or you know, some basic changes to it, but it's very recognizable to those people who attend that program. That saves you time finding images. It saves you time reinventing the wheel over and over and over again. And also try to make use of social media scheduling tools. Maybe you can just sit down and schedule a month's worth of posts, and then leave room for the spontaneous posts, like, I don't know, a squirrel is playing with something funny outside the library window, or the whole staff accidentally wore coordinating shirts, or, you know, just something silly that makes people feel like they're involved with you. I find a lot of our libraries get the highest engagement when it's just something personal like that. So definitely leave room for spontaneity. And don't be afraid to watch tutorials, whether it's the Canva tutorials, or YouTube, LinkedIn Learning, or Gale courses. They all have excellent marketing, design, technical software, like anything you need, you can find it online. So those are just a few little tips. And I think maybe the biggest tip, which I see I didn't write down, oh no, I did, schedule time for marketing, especially if that isn't your first priority in your job. That gives you time to plan out what you want to say. It gives you time to do the ADA and the WIFM and focus on your message. It gives you time to focus on the hierarchy, to focus on your design. And it gives you time to refine your workflow and not feel rushed. So just make sure you're scheduling time. And even if marketing and design is your full time, maybe you find it hard to get your newsletter done every week or every month. Try scheduling it like a meeting. Just prioritize for yourself. And then by scheduling it, it's easier to hold yourself accountable to that. Next slide, please. All right, and then I think we're all gonna tackle this one. This is the applying design concepts, where we took some of the submitted images and kind of glammed them up. We didn't do all of them, but thank you to everyone who did submit pieces, and here we go.
Here we go.
Okay, I guess I'll start. So the first thing I noticed about this poster is that the artwork, even though you couldn't see it that well, it was pertinent to the topic. And so saying along with that, something that could be improved on that, I would actually love to see Granny smile. And right now she's hiding. So even though the artwork is there and it's great for the topic, I'd like to see that used a little bit differently so that we can see her.
Mhm. Yeah, I thought the title's really catchy as far as like if we're talking about copywriting, you know, it's definitely got the attention part of Ada. People are going to want to know what that is and what's going on with that. I thought that the text, the description text is a little bit long. It's definitely catchy and it keeps people's interest. It might keep them reading, but it is a little bit long. That's probably something that could be improved on that.
Do we want to move to the glam up?
Sure.
Sure. So
this is kind of how we reimagined it. We separated the image and the headline. So now you get the full effect of an image. And we also kind of used the hierarchy principles that Heather talked about to make the image bigger, to be more attention grabbing. So the description was shortened a little bit. We added the street address. And then to make things a little easier and to kind of group those important informations kind of in their size order, we separated it into 2 columns. So not only did we get more color, but we got more clarity in the text just by the size and the color and the spacing.
mhm.
Another thing on the imagery that we changed it to, and that's kind of why I talked about when you're searching for images, having a couple different options so that you can either have some options that are maybe in the portrait mode versus landscape. You can see that the original started as a portrait and then in the remake, we did as a landscape. So it filled up that space a little bit better.
Yeah, white space is good, but if you have too much white space, you're losing so much of your potential. All right, so the next one we have here is songbook sessions, and do we want to talk about some of the positives here?
Absolutely. I'll start out saying that I love the simplicity of the text. It was very nice and clean. It was eye-catching. And I also want to point out that they did an excellent job with the social media icons because a lot of the social media, they have specifics that you need to use the original colors and everything needs to be the same size. So they did wonderful on that.
So a few of the things that we thought could be improved is a little more contrast between the background and the text. This is another example where perhaps a horizontal photo might be improved with the balance of the white space. Perhaps adding a time would be helpful to folks wanting to attend this session. And if it's being displayed outside of the library, a street address for the library might help. And we also thought maybe a brief description would be helpful because we weren't sure if songbook sessions was like a collections promotion or if some musicians were already scheduled to come in or if it was more of a jam session where the songbooks were out and you could bring your instrument and play. So a little clarification on that might be a good thing.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we changed it a little bit, gave it a little bit of a description. Again, there's the word enjoy instead of listen, enjoying live music and a hot drink. It depends on what your audience is. Maybe this is for children. It doesn't seem like it just based on the design. Doesn't look like a kid's thing, but again, you may want to add maybe another sentence too. If you have other descriptions about maybe like bring the family or something like that. You can make it a little bit even more enticing, or kind of depending on what type of event this is. But this is what we added.
You'll also notice that we lightened up that background blue just a little bit so that the darker blue of the text stands out more so that it is more legible for people.
We also shrank the social media graphics a little bit, those icons, just to make them less dominant, because that isn't the most important information, although it is a good thing to have it on there.
All right.
Before you go on, we did have a question. Are there any guidelines for making sure there's enough contrast between text and background? The person mentioned that often finds herself arguing with people just about this because she often thinks there isn't enough in many designs.
Actually, if you Google it online, there are services that you can upload your document and it will do a contrast checker. And so that's one way to do it. And a lot of them are free. And then also, when you're talking about color schemes and things, that Adobe site that Heather mentioned, that also has a color blindness checker, which is actually checking the contrast between the different colors as well, because well, it just does. So that's another free website, and you don't have to own Adobe products to use that website, that feature. So.
We'll go on to our last one that we did here.
Right. So the positives on this one was it was well branded, not only with the program's logo, but also with the library's logo. The colors are very eye-catching, and the QR codes can be very helpful for long URLs, so folks don't have to try to remember those or type them in properly.
Some of the things that we thought could be improved with this are seeing that it is very text heavy, is to really concentrate on that hierarchy of the text where the most important things are going to be largest, then the supporting information is going to be grouped together so that it's easier to read that information. And then anything that may not be an essential part of the text, it could either be removed, shortened, or shrunk down in size.
So here we got rid of a lot of those blocks that were kind of stair-stepping in the opposite direction. Like we read left to right, and the blocks were kind of leading us right to left. So we kind of arranged that a little differently. We made the program title bigger. We made the benefit larger. So the professional development for early childhood educators, that's really the benefit that the folks enjoying the program are seeking. And that's also kind of the desire portion too, because in order to stay certified, you need these continuing education hours. So we removed the illustrated graphic that had toys, because that kind of appealed to a younger audience. And while the early childhood educators would have those materials, we thought that providing the resources, the image of the resources might be more of a draw to the age group we're targeting. We shortened the bullets so that they can get the rest of the information at the rest of the information at the location below, and they could read it faster. And then we kept the rest of the information, the links, the QR codes, but yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all for attending. This is all of our contact information. As we mentioned, you will be receiving a copy of all the slides, and I think that we'll be getting some of those additional links as well to all of you. Hopefully this is all helpful to you. And Lori, are there any additional questions or anything that we can answer?
Oh, well, there was just one that mentioned about asking about the blurring of the bottom edge of the image that you had for the three ladies, the spunky bras. If so, how did you do that?
I used InDesign, Adobe InDesign, and then I used a gradient on that. But I think if you were doing it in Canva or Publisher or something like that, I think you could make a box with a white to transparent gradient and just put that on top of it.
Yeah, I've done that in Canva. You can't do that. So you can get, if you go to elements and get it like a box, and then you can look for, or actually go to elements and look for gradient. I think you can find a gradient box, and then you can select two different colors and have one of them be transparent and one of them be white. I believe how that works. Something like that. It's been a little while since I've done it, but I'm pretty sure it's in there.
Okay, thanks. And we're going to have to end the program. It's already a couple minutes after 3. So thank you very much. Thank to Heather, Jill, and Tovah for this great training. And thanks everyone for joining us today. A link to the recording for today's webinar along with slides will be emailed to you likely tomorrow. So have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.